Well, thank you everyone for coming to this very important symposium. And I'm very sorry for the delays. I think we have been having some technical problems, but I think we should straight away start our program. So I'd invite Reverend Dr. Gusha to give us some opening remarks.
Thank you, Reverend Gusha. Let me just rush on to the welcome remarks because we're now behind schedule, so that will not affect the next speakers. Distinguished speakers, moderators, Global Institute of Peace staff, participants, ladies and gentlemen, greetings. On behalf of the Global Institute for Peace, I am pleased to welcome you to this one-day international symposium on the role of political alliances in promoting sustainable peace, interrogating the role of the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance in the ancient Israel, NATO, EU, in Ukraine and Russia, and SADC in Southern Africa. This is our first international program since the outbreak of COVID-19 3 years ago. The outbreak of COVID-19 gave us the opportunity to retreat and re-strategize, and we are happy that we are coming back much stronger and much focused. As I welcome you to this virtual symposium, I would like to say a few words about the Global Institute for Peace. It is an organization that was established in 2014 under the brand SYPA, Southern Africa Interfaith and Peace Academy, and rebranded this year to Global Institute for Peace. Our vision remains the same of promoting peace and tolerance in the universe by integrating theory and experience. Our mission remains threefold. That is to enable participants to make meaningful contribution to the world's sustainable peace and development, and to provide super quality intellectual discourse reinforced by experience. The scope of our work covers the following 5 thematic areas, which we think are important for achieving sustainable peace. And these are democracy and governance, ecology, gender, ethnicity, and interfaith dialogue. These thematic areas are enshrined in the 5 Sustainable Development Goals, which are 5, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Therefore, we are making our contribution in transforming our world. The work of the organization is driven by 8 people, 8 men and women who are energized by the passion to see a better world. 5 are theologians who are clerics, 2 are from the hospitality industry, and 1 is our legal expert. And all these are offering their services purely on a voluntary basis. For more information about the organization, please visit us on the following platforms: our website, globalinstituteforpeace.org, Facebook, Global Institute for Peace, YouTube, Global Institute for Peace. Our apologies that we are all still trying to live stream on other platforms because of other technical hiccups. But we are recording the proceedings so that we can upload them later if we completely fail to live stream them. At this moment, let me take this. One of my jobs today is to introduce moderators. I just introduce the first moderator, then after that, I'll introduce the others when we come to the time when they will be speaking. Our first, the moderator for the first program today, for the first session, is none other than Professor Kudzaibiri. Professor Kudzaibiri, first of all, before I just say anything about her, she is my lecturer. She was my lecturer from the University of Zimbabwe from undergrad. So today I've got the opportunity of having more than 3 of my former teachers here. She is the professor at the University of Zimbabwe's Department of Philosophy, Religion, and Ethics. Her areas of specialization are African indigenous religions and Pentecostalism. She also teaches religion and ethics. She has published widely on religion and gender, religion and politics, religion and technology, religion and migration, with special focus on African traditional religions and Pentecostalism. One of her recent publications is the book entitled The Wounded Beast, Single Women, Tradition and the Bible in Zimbabwe, published by the University of Bamberg Press, Germany. She is a fellow with the University of South Africa and recently with Otto Frederick Universitat Bamberg. So, Professor Biri, welcome you to this virtual platform. And now I hand over the program to you to start the proceedings by introducing the first speaker. Thank you.
Okay. We are having Professor Regis Masiwa Gunda, who is our first presenter. Mr. Masiwa Gunda is presenting on the importance. This topic reads the role of political alliance in promoting sustainable peace, interrogating the role of the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance. And because of our time, I don't have to waste much time. I hand over to Prof. Regis Masiwa Gunda. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Prof. Good afternoon, friends. It's so warm to be with you this afternoon. And allow me to share my screen so that we can begin to have this conversation. So I have here, my title is the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE Alliance, Understanding the Dynamics of Alliance Making in Biblical Times. And the reason is very deliberate. I always try to take my time to draw connecting lines between what happens in ancient Israel and in biblical times to what is happening amongst us. But this will not stop us from making necessary attempts at drawing interfaces and intersectionalities between the past and the present. Now, let me begin, friends, by saying alliances or treaties or covenants have always been part of human relations since time immemorial, beginning with interfamily relations in which marriage became a critical form of alliance making that ensured growth of families into larger units, possibly clans and tribes. The biblical world or the ancient Near East is not immune from this normal formalization of human relations at an individual level, such as what we see in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 16 to 18, when David and Jonathan formalize an individual relationship, friendship, in the form of a treaty. But we also then have treaties that are entered into at kingdom level, as the one that we are focusing in, which is in 2 Kings chapter 16, verses 5 to 9, between Israel and Syria, and possibly other states of the Levant. Our focus today is the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance of the second half of the 8th century BCE. In particular, this treaty must have happened between 737 and 732 BCE. And two critical questions. What were the push and pull factors, area that we are talking about? So this is happening before the time that we're looking at. So we have the ancient Near East here with Media, Persia, Babylonia, Assyria, which is one of the key partners. And then we have Syria with its capital at Damascus, and then the capital of Samaria for the northern kingdom of Israel, and Jerusalem for the southern kingdom. And there was always Egypt to the southwest of this ancient Near East. So, treaties in the ancient Near East. A treaty in general is regarded as a sworn political agreement between two nations under oath. And in the ancient world, in the ancient Near East, these treaties were almost always witnessed by the gods of each of the nation involved in a treaty, these gods were supposed to be the guarantors. And the treaties were always agreed upon under the threat of punishment for breaking of the agreement, especially if the treaty was between unequal partners. The earliest known document which has some information regarding a treaty is the Stele of Vouchers. And this is a document that's coming from around 2500 BCE. The Stele of Vouchers, which was a treaty ended between Enatum of Lagash and the nearby state of Umma. And in this treaty, Enatum appeared to have been a much stronger and powerful ally or party to the treaty, which therefore imposed obligations on the defeated state of Umma. In Sumerian states, and Sumerian states now we're talking of Mesopotamia, which is where we find Assyria and Babylonia. So in these Sumerian states, there were from an early date two kinds of treaties. The kind of a parity treaty between states that are more or less of equal status, and a treaty imposed by a victorious ruler on a defeated enemy, which is regarded as the suzerain treaty or sometimes as the vassal treaty. So the parity treaty bound the parties to equal or similar obligations, while the suzerain treaty obligations were imposed by powerful kings on vassals. So these are very different treaties. And if you were to look at contemporary times, you possibly are looking at treaties between Zimbabwe and Zambia, Zimbabwe and Botswana, Zimbabwe and Mozambique, more in the line of parity treaties. But if you start looking at treaties between Zimbabwe and China, you're looking at a different kind of treaty, the suzerain treaty. One very powerful nation entering into an agreement with a weaker brother. So the background to the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance. Scholars generally agree that with Tiglath-Pileser III, a new period of Neo-Assyrian expansionistic policy started. This coincided with the end of the golden eras for Israel and Judah under Jeroboam II and Uzziah, respectively. And with Tiglath-Pileser III from 744 to 727 BCE, his policy is what interests us very much. Military conquest. With Tiglath-Pileser III, he sent an emissary ahead of him to rush to Jerusalem to ask the chief priest to construct an altar that he had seen in Damascus, where an altar to the god Assur had been constructed. So these states were already feeling the pressure of the Assyrian onslaught. And so they agreed to pay tribute. 740 to 739, they are paying tribute to Tiglath-Pileser III. However, around 737, Assyria decides to attack states that were in the north and east. This allowed the Levantine states to dream of independence, of expansion of their own. And therefore in Israel, the king that had become a vassal to Assyria, Pekah, was overthrown by Pekah, suggesting that there was an anti-Assyrian faction that was in existence in Israel, which might have been pro-Egypt, but that is not certain. So this is the situation that leads to the creation of an alliance. there is an opportunity because Assyria is focused elsewhere. There is an opportunity to take off. So in 3 different texts in the Old Testament, 2 Kings chapter 16, 5-9, 2 Chronicles 28, 5-21, and Isaiah 7, 1-2. The Bible speaks of the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE crisis or war in which Judah came under military attack from Israel and Syria. It might have also included Tyre, Gaza, Philistia, Edom, and Moab. But the thing is, nowhere in the biblical text or even in Assyrian sources do we find an explicit mention of the alliance, the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance. We conjecture the alliance from the information that we have in terms of them working together. And this war is only attested to in these biblical texts. There are no extra biblical sources that confirm this war. However, there are some details that are attested in Assyrian sources that make us conclude that the biblical texts have a historical kernel. The Assyrian sources, Annals 18:23-24, and summary inscriptions on 4, 7, 9, and 13 support the 2 Kings 16, 5-9 account that Tiglath-Pileser III took military action against Syria, Israel, and Tyre, resulting in the defeat of Damascus, and large portions of the northern kingdom and Tyre were annexed and turned into Assyrian provinces. The alliance is conjectured based on the following shared experiences by the alleged alliance partners. They both were experiencing the burden of paying tribute to Tiglath-Pileser III. They both had the desire for freedom and independence. And finally, they wanted to establish sustainable defense systems against Tiglath-Pileser III. So 3 key factors driving or making us realize why an alliance was something that was attractive in that time. So here are the push and pull factors as we look at it. The heavy tributary burden exacted on Israel and Aram by Tiglath-Pileser III was taking its toll on the citizens. Because remember that when a foreign power exacted tribute on a conquered people, the rulers would transfer that burden onto the ordinary people. So if they were collecting $5 in tax per person, and now because they have to pay the tribute, they would simply come in and collect $10 or $15, whatever. So the ordinary people felt the burden, which would explain why ordinary people would have supported anybody that promised independence from Assyria. The second push factor is the threat of falling victim to the new Assyrian military and political ideology of conquest, the body politic. That also must have contributed. And finally, the shifted focus towards Urartu and Media meant most Assyrian soldiers were recalled from the west to go to the east to fight the new enemy. And so there was, in a way, a breather granted to the states in the west, the Levantine states, Israel, Syria, and the other states, as Assyria fought to control what was happening in the north and east. The pull factors: ensuring freedom and independence without the burden of tribute looks attractive. Expansion of territory, because they could move to Judah, they could take areas like they did and therefore expand their own territory. That looks attractive. Control of trade routes, That also was a key pull factor to go for the alliance. And and to a certain extent, Egyptians support this region if it's not under their control to be at least strong enough to keep Assyria away from Egypt. So Egypt would normally go in and support the Levantine states in their wars against Assyria. So Assyria attacks the promised land, making sure that the support to the alliance, Israel and Syria, is cut out from Egypt. Then Assyria attacked the northern parts of Damascus, took away Damascus and some parts of Israel, and took away the Transjordanian states, making sure that the alliance was cut out of any routes of support that they might have enjoyed. So what do we learn from this alliance? The consequences of and for the alliance. First, the alliance emboldened alliance members to withhold tributary payments due to Assyria. Because we are now a team, we feel stronger, and therefore we can no longer be ordered around. The alliance was meant to resist Assyrian expansion into the Levant by involving all Levantine states, which explains the march on Jerusalem to bring Judah on board. Judah lost territories to the alliance as well as to the Transjordanian states, Edom and Moab. But they did not succeed eventually in bringing Judah on board. And this is a very clear lesson. Unless this alliance becomes very strong, it will not stand a chance against the mighty of Assyria. So alliances like this needed a clear feasibility study to see what it would take to become a formidable opponent to an established and well-oiled machine that had been put into motion by Tiglath-Pileser III. Assyria interpreted the withholding of tribute as rebellion and decided to take control of the region by strategically subduing these states. And this was done in 3 phases by Tiglath-Pileser III. The first wave targeted towards Philistia, cutting the alliance from Egypt. The second wave was directed towards and then finally the third wave of this was now directed towards the alliance principal partners, and Aram was totally provincialized. So Syria became a full province of Assyria, while the northern parts of Israel faced the same fate. But Pekah was assassinated and replaced by Hoshea, who was then given the throne by Tiglath-Pileser III as a tribute-paying vassal. And therefore Samaria survived for some time. Not too long though, because as soon as Hoshea tried to rebel again at the death of Tiglath-Pileser III, then Samaria was run over. The alliance forced the hand of Assyria, or rather, it quickened the hand of Assyria, because Assyria was already having its sights set on the Levant. An ill-thought alliance was the catalyst to the end of political independence of most Levantine states during this time. And most of them never recovered really after that. So from this map, the purple slot here in the center was the Assyrian kingdom when Tiglath-Pileser III became the king in 745 BCE. And he expanded that kingdom to now include the entire green part. And you can see also here Samaria and Damascus and so on. So eventually, that's how big the Assyrian Empire became because of these policies of Tiglath-Pileser III. So you conquer, you deport, and you repopulate by mixing different people from different conquered lands, all scattered throughout the new kingdom, and creating from this a new identity. So alliances of whatever sort are needs driven. Needs by the suzerain, needs by a vassal, needs by equal partners. It is critical to identify the needs and to carry out a thorough self-examination. The SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance underestimated the strength of their foe, while Ahaz, the Judean king, probably did a better job in studying the threats and thereby siding with Assyria. Alliances are attempts by organized society to protect, defend, and propagate its own interests by leveraging them on the interests of other protagonists. No alliance is disinterested. No one comes into an alliance without their own interest. Internal disharmony is the greatest threat to the success of an alliance. A major weakness of Israel based on its plurality of groupings and interests when compared to Judah. When alliances are made out of haste and without appropriate and thorough appraisal, the end result is utter destruction. Syria and Israel and all their partners faced the military defeat by the Assyrian Empire, beginning with Tiglath-Pileser III, but extending to the reigns. So we have Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, Sargon II, Sennacherib, who reigned from Syria, rebelled and was quashed 701 at great cost on Judah. So in a way, alliances are meant to be partnerships to defend and to propagate interests, common interests. And in most cases, we see this in political institutions, political organizations. Coming from Zimbabwe, we are reminded of the funnily named global political agreement that never went outside of the borders of Zimbabwe, and what made it global remains something of interest. But we have alliances coming up, and we always have different ways of looking at the success of alliances or their failures. We also try to look at whose interests were served in an alliance, because every partner in an alliance has to have some of their interests being protected. Whether it is suzerain alliance, whether it is a parity treaty, there are still interests, needs that are giving rise to alliance making. No alliance is made out of no need. Every alliance is need driven. And this is the key. So the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance was known to have this particular need. the need to defend from the encroachment of Assyria, but the need to expand territory within the Levant. There were two dominant states in the Levant. Israel and Syria were the dominant states in the Levant. And so their alliance was meant indeed. Sure, but I had completed my presentation, so thank you, Prof.
Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Gunda. I was learning a lot and also generated a lot of questions. May you allow me to abuse my position as the moderator before I open the discussion? It's good that you have addressed some of the questions that I already have. Whose interests do political alliances serve? Because with interests do political alliances serve? Because you have the case study of the Old Testament setting, and we are in 2022. We are talking of Russia, Ukraine. We have Southern Africa also in mind. What lessons can we draw? What are the similarities? What are the differences? Because when your topic talks of sustainable peace, is something that is very needful in Southern Africa. It's something that's very needful in Ukraine, Russia right now. It's something that is needful globally. And maybe when we talk of peace, it's not the absence of just gunfire or so, but we have a lot, particularly when we look at our region, Southern Africa, where we have a cycle of poverty, a lot of challenges, political unrest, and so forth, political violence, and so forth. And peace is needful. I do hope you are going to shed more light on what insights can be drawn from the Old Testament setting in 2022 in view of the challenges that we currently have in the two case studies that your topic has captured. You also talked about the types of alliances, what they are, the context of alliances, the types of alliances, and the reasons, such as the push and pull factors. I don't want to take the center stage, but I want to throw it to the panel for their contributions. This is now time for discussion. So over to you, the panel.
Thank you very much, Professor Biri, for giving us this opportunity to ask questions. And thank you very much, Dr. Gunda, for such an enlightening presentation. My question is very simple, or else I did not maybe understand something from your presentation very well. I just want to ask you if you could maybe explain to us in simple terms whether the
Can you please repeat the question because you were no longer audible?
I'm saying, to what extent did the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance achieved or managed to bring harmony or peace in Israel? From your research or your understanding.
Yes, thank you for that question. The thing I would say, it depends with how we want to look at the SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance. In the short term, and the short term is really short in the sense that this is an alliance that came about in 737. But by 732, Damascus was a province of Assyria. So would I say that Israel and Syria achieved their goal of forming this alliance? They didn't, because all they did was to actually quicken the end of political independence for themselves. Because the thing is, they underestimated the power of Assyria. And so by forming an alliance, they wanted long-term sustainable peace without the shadow of Assyria always hanging above them, always threatening to descend on them. That's what they wanted to do. But what they did was actually to repeat what had happened a century earlier, when again, Israel and also Syria had tried to rebel against Assyria. They could not tell the difference between having an army of volunteers and a professional standing army. Assyria had a professional standing army. Soldiers that were paid to wait to go and fight. You needed to resist and to be successful against Assyria. So what we see is a vision for sustainable peace, but that is actually so ill thought that it actually then led to utter destruction. Important, because we all survive on alliances, and that's why I said early on from the beginning, we have to understand. So if marriage is an alliance making, it's that important. So every alliance is important. If we want to succeed to do things, we need alliances. But alliances also need to be well thought out. They have to provide a platform that makes sustainable peace achievable and not quicken destruction.
Reverend Gusha, I hope your question has been answered.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, anyone with, this is discussion time, everybody is free to ask questions or to contribute what they have.
Reverend Majara is raising his hand.
Reverend Majara, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Miri, and thank you, Professor Gunda. So my question is regarding the driving force. While the needs that very significant, I also understand that values may also contribute in terms of making decisions regarding alliances, and even also influencing the needs, because some needs are pursued because people have particular values that they want to protect. So in your presentation, how do you see values play out in terms of influencing the alliances, the choice of alliances, and in our global perspective, the modern global view? Where do you see values kind of play a role in our case? Thank you.
Thank you, Rev. I think that the most practical and considered value in political alliances is self-preservation. We don't have too many political alliances that are driven by the values of life, of rights, of the life of the common people. Most political alliances are driven by self-preservation, and therefore most of these alliances serve the interests of the political leadership. Whatever alliance you might think of, it rarely is meant to save the ordinary people. unless the ordinary people become themselves a mass of critical people that are willing to demand accountability from their leaders. So, and in some cases, a critical mass is exploited by cunning political leadership, because a critical mass is a captured audience. And this is what happened in Israel. Because in 740, Pekahiah has entered into an agreement with Assyria in which he is paying tribute. And then he goes to the ordinary people and increases their taxes so that he can pay the tribute to Assyria without reducing his own taxation from the people. So the burden is not on the king. The burden of Assyrian taxation or tribute is passed on to the ordinary people. And so ordinary people hate Assyria because they know what is happening. So when Pekah takes over the throne with the promise of taking away the burden of Assyrian tribute from their backs, the people go with Pekah. But I doubt that Pekah is actually out to save the people. Pekah is out to grab the throne and, make himself rich and therefore well suited to do things, and possibly even still increase the tax on the people. So at the end of the day, I think if in terms of thinking of values, we are saying, do we have politicians that say our value is justice? So we will only enter into a treaty with people that also believe in justice. Then we will be forever disappointed because we don't have such politicians anywhere, not in the ancient past, not today. Most of these politicians, their only value is self-preservation. They want to survive in politics.
Thank you.
I'm interested, Professor Biri. Just a follow-up from on Reverend Majara's issue. Prof has raised a very interesting issue of self-preservation. Now, Prof, Dr. Regis Gunda, from your presentation, I was also interested in knowing how this SYRO-EPHRAIMITE alliance affected the ordinary people in Israel. And from your presentation, what I picked clearly is the issue of taxes. That it means that ordinary people were made maybe to pay double tax increased maybe by 100%, so that you see, this is what I picked. But I might also be interested to know some of the religious, social, for me, this is an economic issue. We talk about taxes, but I might be interested to know the religious or social implications of this alliance to the general Israelites.
Thank you. Well, I hear you.
Dr. Gunda,
Yes.
Dr. Gunda, before you answer on that one, I think we have to bunch that together. You have a catchword, self-preservation, and you said alliances are needful. They are a need both to the vassal and also to the superpower or those who are mightier. My question, particularly in line with developments in Southern Africa or Africa as the whole continent, where we have the masses languishing in poverty and alliances are needful. I've asked before whose interest alliances save, and you answered that question for me satisfactorily. But I'm looking at the different stratas in society where we have a big gap between the rich and the poor in most African countries. And from whose perspective should we say alliances, political alliances are needful and are there for sustainable peace, especially considering the status quo on the continent of Africa?
Yes, I would say I'm not sure if I said needful, but needs driven. In other words, there are certain interests that are making different states to come together to form an alliance to create a bigger, stronger version of themselves put together with the hope that it will protect their interests. And your question, if I get you right, is there, who is there? In most cases, look at SADC. SADC is a club of old men that participated in the liberation war during the 60s, 70s, and so on, and who find it so difficult to include in their clubs anybody that might not be coming from their generation. So their interest, yes, possibly very little to do with my mother in Rusape or our relatives in Cholocho or anywhere else. This is a leaders' club protecting their interests. So in most cases, political interests are those of the elites. You know, politics is like our history. Our history is the history of the public, the elites. Those are the history makers. We don't find the stories of our mothers in history books. We find the stories of the so-called history makers, but ideally of the leaders, because they are the ones that demand or that commission history, so to speak. So I think in general, we are living in a world in which the elites are the ones whose interests are being served. But that does not mean it is the only way of having alliances that serve the ordinary people as well. What we need is to create a critical mass of the ordinary people. People that have a criteria of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. People that know how to demand accountability from the elites, from the leadership. But we don't have that critical mass as we speak, particularly across the African continent. We're beginning to see it happen in Ghana, for example, where a critical mass is now at play, and that's why it's now possible for Ghana to go for an election, change a president, and then the next election they change again because the people feel this president did not deliver on their promises. But we need to build that critical mass. And that's why I am excited, that we have the Global Institute for Peace, an institution that can play a part in building this critical mass of people that can demand accountability, that knows that it's possible to influence the kind of alliances our political leaders will make. As it stands today, we have no input in the alliances that are made, in the deals that are made. I was laughing at, is it the Pomona deal in Harare, right? Where citizens are supposed to pay for a deal that was authorized by government, a government that now blames the city council. And so we don't even know who is benefiting from this deal. But what we know for a fact is that the people that live in Harare will have to pay for that. So this is the reality, but it is not the only reality. Now, Reverend Gusha, on the other things, first I would have said it's us today that see economics, politics, religion, and so on as separate entities. In ancient Israel, paying taxes to a foreign empire that is led by another God that is not Yahweh is already apostasy. So it's a faith matter. However, remember, I also mentioned in my presentation that part of the policy of Tiglath-Pileser was making sure that the altar of Assur, the god of Assyria, were constructed in all the conquered territories. And that all these people, those that were deported from their territories and repopulated in other territories, were eventually christened Assyrians or followers of Assur. And we know for a fact that Assyria, that's why, you know, part of the conflicts between the Jews in the south and the Samaritans in the north has to do with what happened in the north when the north was overrun by Assyria, because they repopulated with people and there were intermarriages that happened between the Israelites and the new people that were brought in by the Assyrians. And obviously the temple, we know that then you have the temples of the Assyrian gods and all these things. So religiously, Israel was no longer the pre-alliance Israel, because they now were forced to accommodate Assyrian faith, Assyrian religion. And so whatever happened had impact across the board, economic, religious, political, because politically, we know that Hoshea was a puppet installed by the Assyrian king. When he tried to rebel, he was thrown out, and then Samaria came under the leadership of a governor appointed by the Assyrians. So it was thorough in terms of even eventually changing the identity of the Northerners. And that's why eventually the Northerners are not seen as pure Yahwists, because of the way they had mixed up with all the other people that had been brought in, and people with different religions, even though we hear that at some point there was an attempt to convert those that were repopulated to Yahwism, but we think also that's part of the apologetics of the authors trying still to preserve Yahwism.
Thank you, Dr. Gunda. We still have about 5 minutes, and there's Dr. Ashford Msonza's hand, I see. Can you proceed, sir?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dr. Gunda, for that wonderful presentation. My question is back to the alliances. Would you like to share with us from your Old Testament knowledge, examples of alliances that actually benefited the ordinary, or to use the Marxist language, the proletariat people? And if there are any as such, how possible is that in our current context, especially here in Africa, where the rich and the powerful are the ones who are in control? They are the ones who decide who to befriend. They are the ones who organize these alliances, and they are the ones who choose. I put that to you, Doctor, if you can shed a bit of light to us.
Thank you so much, Rev. I thought you would go easy on me, but I realized, no, I was fooling myself. Now, Doc, the honest truth, first and foremost, as a biblical scholar, is that we tend to expect too much from the Bible. And therefore, sometimes we get disappointed if we don't get to meet what we were expecting. But here is what I would say. I think the thing for me that stands out as something of a success story, including the ordinary people, is actually the alliance that led to the formation of Israel as a state. The alliance that brought together the ordinary people in their masses. A small group of intellectuals escaping from Egypt, and I think a few other disgruntled people within the system, led to the formation of what we then know in the Bible as Israel. That for me is the only success story that you can talk of. If you are looking at something that comes through the agency of the ordinary people. So we don't have the ordinary people having things done for them, which is our weakness today. Most of our people today want things done for them, right? But if you look at the formation of Israel, it's the ordinary people realizing that this feudal system under which we are living is only bent on extracting and extracting and extracting further from us. We need to stand up and make sure that this extraction stops. And when they're in the process of doing that, a group comes in from outside that says, we share your values. We go back again to somebody's who mentioned the question of values. We share your values. There ought to be justice. But you see, the reason why you can't have justice here is that you're dealing with gods that are not just. Why don't you embrace a God of justice? And so Yahwism is merged with the expectations and the values of the ordinary people that have suffered under the feudal system. So for me, that is the only time I can think of an alliance that actually saves the ordinary people. Other than that, Solomon doesn't save the people. David doesn't save the people. All these guys, we wish they had saved the people, but the reality is they did not.
Oh, thank you very much, Doc. That is to the point, classic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gunda. My eyes are on the clock and it's almost time up, but I want